That plane, no survivors, and our CNN aviation analyst Mary Schiavo can give us some perspective about what is happening right now with this investigation, given that we've just found out that the flight data recorder has been located.
Well, that's a very important part of the investigation. That's the first thing, other than, of course, taking care of injured or victims, in this case, all victims. The investigators always go first for the black boxes as soon as it's safe to go into a crash site like this with intense fire. And because on a plane that's only, 7 or 8 years old, those black boxes are going to have a lot of data. We call them on the flight data recorder parameters. And so on a fairly new plane, and 7 years is actually fairly new, there will be perhaps not only dozens, but there's a chance there will be hundreds of parameters. What were the engines setting at? What were the flight control surfaces? What were the flaps and various control surfaces set at? Which pilot was controlling the flight? All of that's on the flight data recorder, and of course the cockpit voice recorder will have the voices of the pilots, and that will tell us whether or not they were experiencing anything related to the weather. But on takeoff, statistically speaking, and I've seen a lot of takeoff crashes, worked a lot over the past 30 years, you usually have a problem with your engines. There's reports on pilot chat rooms about a possible midair with a helicopter, but investigators on the scene should be able to see helicopter parts as opposed to aircraft parts rather readily, so that's not confirmed.
Right. And just how quickly, Mary, will they be able to access that data now that they have the flight data recorder in their hands?
Usually about 24 hours, depending upon what laboratory they take it to. The download labs, acoustic labs, they do a download, but then the analysis takes a lot longer. But the first download, it looks a lot like an EKG on the flight data recorder. When you print it out, it has a lot of parameters and it looks like, sort of running data lines. On the cockpit voice recorder, you have to analyze every sound you hear in the cockpit, every click, bump, bang, etc. But most important, they will get immediately is what the pilots were saying to each other.
And Mary, this jet was operated by a regional operator called Saratov Airlines. This is a company that was banned at one point, right?
Well, it was interesting. It was banned for having someone in the cockpit who shouldn't have been in the cockpit. Most airlines of the world maintain sterile cockpit rules, and they make sure no one's in the cockpit, particularly on takeoff and landing. If one of the pilots leaves, a flight attendant is supposed to go in, so there's always 2 people in the cockpit at the same time. But those are international flight rules and U.S. and U.K. flight rules. But the other reports were that this particular plane, and these are, all of these are unconfirmed. There's so much information coming out of Russia right now, and it's all different. But there was a report that they had at one point problems getting parts for this plane. Now, that would be highly significant if you were experiencing an engine problem on takeoff, which the descent rate was something like 3,000 feet per second. Yeah, that's a plane that isn't maintaining flight with its engine. So lots of different reports as to what it could be, but parts